this webinar. We had a question earlier about that, so no worries there. My name is Megan Dotson, and I'm the program manager for the National American Indian and Alaska Native Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, which is why we're bringing you this event. And we are at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. We're part of the National MHTTC network. It looks like this on our map. We're about right here. And then SAMHSA disclaimer, of course, this project is supported by our funder SAMHSA, and the content that's developed is by the presenter, and the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the American Indian and Alaska Native MHTTC. So following today's event, we will send out a follow-up email to which we'll have links to the presentation slides and the recording, information about how to request and receive CEUs, and a link to our evaluation survey called GIPRA. So be patient for that. That does get sent out after the webinar is over, when we have all that information ready to go. We would like to take this time to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken over and inhabited. Please take a moment to read this land acknowledgement, which was created by 3 members of our team, Ella and Keely Driscoll and Sean Bear, and this will be in your handouts as well. And then we have today's speaker, Avis Garcia, with us. And this is our 5th part to this series, Trauma-Informed Therapy. Today we'll have a little bit of a focus on human trafficking as well. So with that, I will let Avis take it over from here. And this will be a 60-minute presentation. If you guys have questions, we can sure keep those until the end, or please write your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll monitor that as we go. So with that, Avis, thank you very much for joining us, and go ahead.
Okay, good morning or afternoon for everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. The presentation that I'll be doing today is specific, a request. This has specifically been requested by the participants in the past prior to starting this series. And I was asked if I would do a series on trauma, and I like to give my viewers what they want, and I do research for the work that I do. And this presentation today was based on specific requests from those of you that follow my presentations that I do. I have been in the mental health and substance abuse field for about 20 years now. Majority of my work has been with people on my reservation, the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, where the Northern Arapaho and the Eastern Shoshone reside. I am enrolled Arapaho, and my father was Eastern Shoshone, so I call myself a show rep. And I've also done a lot of work off the reservation as well. In my professional career, I felt there was a lot that wasn't taught in school that I learned from actually working in agencies, not on the reservation, so that I could use that knowledge to provide services on the reservation as well. The sex trafficking topic is something that's been a really hot topic lately, and I really hadn't thought about how it has affected my tribal community back home. And when we get going further, I'll share some of my experience and my encounters with this issue on my reservation where I come from. We'll go on ahead and get started. I have a lot of material to cover, so we'll save the questions at the end. Feel free to make comments anytime. And I'll go on ahead and get started with this. Get this going. Okay, an overview of what I'm presenting today is what is sex trafficking, advocates' working definition, some common misconceptions, where does this occur, why does it occur, and then we'll do some questions and answers at the end. Some objectives that will be covered are discuss sex trafficking. Again, same things I just covered. We'll skip over those. The legal definition of sex trafficking is, the federal definition is whoever knowingly, one, in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce within the special maritime and territorial jurisdiction of the US, recruits, entices, harbors, transports, provides, obtains, advertises, maintains, patronizes, or solicits by any means a person, or two, benefits financially by receiving anything of value from participation in a venture which has engaged in an act described in violation of paragraph 1. Knowing or except where the fact constituting the violation of paragraph 1 is advertising in reckless disregard the means of force, threats of force, fraud, coercion described in subsection E2, or any combination of such means, will be used to cause the person to engage in a commercial sex act, or that person has not attained the age of 18 years or will be caused to engage in a commercial sex act, shall be punished as provided in subsection B. Please note, force, fraud, and coercion are legal terms that will vary depending on the jurisdiction. The Federal Code USC 1951E provides definitions for coercion and other terms. In this section, the terms coercion means threats of serious harm or physical restraint against any person, any scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause a person to believe that failure to perform an act would result in serious harm to or physical restraint against any person, or the abuse or threatened abuse of law or the legal process. An advocate's working definition of sex trafficking, it's the sexual exploitation of another person for personal or commercial gain. The crime usually includes the trafficker exercising power and control over the victim. Victims may not be free to come and go as they choose. Remember, force, fraud, or coercion needs to be proven if the victim is over 18 years of age. Some common misconceptions is that sex trafficking must involve kidnapping, confinement, or physical force. Sex trafficking must involve travel across state or international boundaries. Traffickers are always strangers to victim. Sex trafficking victims are always female. Getting paid any amount means an individual cannot also be a victim. Victims are eager to receive help, self-identity, and discuss their victimization. Domestic violence is always different from sex trafficking. Again, these are misconceptions. Sex trafficking always involves the exchange of money. This is just a little bit of history on sex trafficking. Due to pre-colonization and our traditional beliefs, and years before this became the United States, women were considered sacred, even in thought. So even just thinking bad about women was not condoned or even respected. Sexuality was natural and women's sexual autonomy was respected. Women were not seen as property of men. Gender and mutual respect was practiced. Matrilineal and matriarchal tribal nations. Tribal justice response to acts of violence was swift and severely punished. So this was pre-colonization era, the 1800s. Looking at historical trauma and how this plays a part in this is something that has happened to our, not just Native women, our children for years, several years, due to the rapes, the wars and the rapes directed towards women and children. And in studying my own tribe, the Northern Arapaho tribe, we had the Sand Creek Massacre in 1868 in November. And when I actually read that in a history book in a class that I took at the university, I was just really, it really had an effect on me that I was never taught in school. My history class, I remember, was something I didn't even enjoy because it was never anything that really interested me. So I didn't really learn about this until I went to college and studied Native history. And that's when I learned more about the Sand Creek Massacre. And I am a direct descendant of the Sand Creek Massacre, but what happened by the US Army against the women was very atrocious. Of the women were, raped and murdered, and their female body parts were actually paraded after they did what they did to my people. And we still have a lot of historical trauma that our people deal with where I come from. There's also been the conquest of land and women who were raped and exploited, boarding schools, the big story that we have to hear lately that's really affected a lot of people has been the finding of those children that recently happened. And it's just horrible. It just brings back what our people have gone through. And I still feel like, this continues to happen to this day. Tribes removed from their homelands, relocation policies laid the foundation. So our homeland for the Arapaho was in Denver, Colorado. I still consider it my homeland, and many of us refer to it as our homeland. But that's why the Sand Creek Massacre happened, is the US government actually planned to just eliminate my tribe altogether, but we're still here. Also, the introduction of drugs and alcohol made it was readily accessible to victims to keep them trapped. And I was reading some history yesterday, a book on Russell Means, and it talks about how a lot of our land was taken, things that happened because they made alcohol readily available. So we need to realize that that was their weapon against us. Removal of children, forcing them into foster care and adoption, where I've encountered several people who were sexually abused in those situations. Land and resources have been exploited, and tribal nations were stripped of jurisdictional authority. Again, this is our historic trauma that we are all struggling with to this day. I like to interject quotes in some of my presentations that really resonate with me. This is a quote from Jack Forbes, who wrote the book called Columbus and Other Cannibals. It says, "From the raping of women to the raping of a country to the raping of the world, acts of aggression, of hate, of conquest, our empire building evolved to harems of women and harems of people, houses of prostitution and houses of pimps." So this is way back to the times of when Columbus first came here. So he was actually the first person who engaged in this type of crime. So where does this sex trafficking occur? This happens in homes, hotels, casinos. A lot of us all have casinos, truck stops, bus terminals, powwow grounds, malls, detention facilities, shelters, bars. And so when I talk about private homes, being a counselor on the reservation, I did a lot of work with the juvenile justice program, where I provided counseling services for a lot of the youth that would present with needs for mental health counseling. We also have a group home for children to go to when they have no place to go to, or either their parents are struggling with them. So my first encounter with this ever occurring in my own community was, we had a huge drug bust on our reservation in 1985. And it's kind of sad because I see the situation reoccurring on my reservation again, but I don't see the law enforcement acting as aggressively as they did then. So when they did that huge bust, we had several families that grandparents and parents were all sentenced to prison, and here's all these kids left with nowhere to go. So a lot of them ended up in group homes because, we weren't able to find families to place them with. And I had some young girls there that their parents were charged with selling drugs. And sadly, as I got to talking to these girls, they all revealed what had happened to them while their parents were dealing drugs on our reservation. And sadly, they were being sex trafficked by their own parents and grandparents. And I had to report that. And explain to the girls what had happened to them. So that was my very first experience with that. Very sad example of it happens in private homes, and it happens by your own family. So these are just a couple of questionings about questions where it occurs. If you know any sex trafficking in your community, do you know where sex trafficking occurs? Where do you think it may occur? So just being aware of these things are some questions to think about. Why does it occur? There's limited research available. There are social risk factors that make it more likely to happen in tribal communities. Native nations have been stripped of jurisdictional authority to combat the problem. Substance use and abuse contributes to this problem, as I just shared with you. Drug dealing, we had the Sinaloan drug cartels on our reservation, and our tribal members were selling it. I have my own cousin who went to prison, and he's turned his life around though. So oftentimes we call on him when we have people that we're trying to help, so that he can go and talk to them about his own personal experience. Housing and family instability. Some people get involved in this because they just need a place to stay. And this is a contemporary problem, but it's also linked to colonization. Why does it occur? Again, pre-contact Native peoples had varied traditions, and some considered violence against women to be taboo. Colonization disrupted the Native life ways and imposed a new social, political, and religious worldview. Post-contact, Native women's bodies were commoditized and exploited. Native women and girls viewed as hypersexual and sexually objectified. Here's a perfect example of people don't realize why we get offended to these images on the right-hand side of the screen. I've seen several others. I have another presentation that I do on mascots that I haven't done here that talks about how this affects our people. So if we see before colonization, see how beautiful our women are. They look nothing like this because we have respect for ourselves. I was just talking yesterday to a friend about how we have our aunties and grandmas there, and if you were just dressed the slightest inappropriately, they might be having a talk with you about how you carry yourself and how you present yourself. So these pictures, Disney cartoons, this just adds to that image of hypersexualization of Native women, and it's just not right. It's very disrespectful. Origins of sex trafficking. Native women and girls have been victims of human trafficking for centuries. Native women's bodies have been exploited, mutilated, and viewed as disposable commodities. Women have been eroticized and hypersexualized in the media. Native women sexually objectified and viewed as property. Systemic change to a systemic problem. Contemporary sex trafficking is a symptom of colonization. Advocates in tribal communities must address the societal norms and attitudes, identify and dismantle systems that support the traffickers, and look to traditional community values that can be used to support anti-trafficking efforts. So the community needs to take a strong, active force. So identifying and screening for sex trafficking. Switch over this. There is a video here that I wanted to share. So let me see if I can switch to that here real quick and come back to this. And go to my internet. Oh, now I'm worried hopefully I don't lose the connection in trying to do that.
So Avis, I think you would just have to share the YouTube screen that you have open and then go back to your PowerPoint when you're done.
Okay. I don't have the YouTube screen up, so let me pull it up right now. Okay. the search button here. There are several on here. If you guys are interested in watching more, there are some more in-depth ones. This is just one that I thought was a really good one for a short one. And it's not exactly showing the exact one that I wanted. Hold on. 6. See if I can enter the link number and see if that works. And it is sorry.
No, it's okay. Bear with us, folks. Screen sharing is difficult sometimes, so no worries.
Yeah, this is I'm trying to. Here's my history. I was just watching several of these earlier. Go back. Sorry, this is my first time trying to put the video on here for
Oh,
everyone.
no worries.
Here's the one that I like that's pretty short. So let me put that on full screen. Are we good?
I'm not sure we can hear it, Avis. Let's see. Avis, is there sound on the video right now?
I can't. What's that?
Is there sound on the video right now? Yeah, if you push pause on the video.
Okay.
Okay, and then you might have to go through and I'll stop your sharing. You'll
Okay.
have to reshare your screen, and then there's
Okay.
there is a button when you go onto screen share at the bottom right, and it says share sound when you click on the share screen button on Zoom.
Okay, I see it.
You see it? Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
click that
okay.
and then click your screen.
Okay.
Thanks for your help, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
Okay, now I just lost it again.
There we go, and then start it from the beginning. And I think we'll be good to go.
I will get this eventually.
Still not hearing anything. Megan, do you hear the audio?
I do not. Nope.
Avis,
Yeah.
do you want to copy the link from your PowerPoint into the chat? Do you want to try that?
Copy the link from this into the chat.
Yes.
I have a suggestion. Why don't we move on from this? We'll give them the link in the
Okay.
follow-up email since you have a lot of
Okay.
content, and we'll go from
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I wasn't able to. I was practicing trying to get the link to work on the PowerPoint and it wasn't working. So I thought I was just going to have to do that. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Like I said, there's several. That was probably one of the shorter ones that has some really good information in there that if you want to follow up on that, that is a good one to watch. Okay, where were we? Okay. Well, we didn't get to watch the video, but when you watch it, there's some questions here that you should probably consider when you watch any of those videos. There was one that was just a little longer that is, it's more of a show that shows some very young girls where one of the girls actually gets involved with someone who was sex trafficking her and she was falling for all the wrong reasons. So who are the sex traffickers? Just like I said, we have family members and that's quite common. Gangs, strangers, new friends, community members, business owners, intimate partners, and people in positions of actual or perceived authority. So I know this, like I said, this has been like a hot topic in like the country lately. So there's a lot of movies on TV, regular shows that come on that are showing this actually happening. And I was like, it's kind of surprising and shocking at the same time. And very recently in the town that I'm living in, one of the massage parlors was actually busted for this type of an issue. And I was like, wow, I never thought right in my town here where I'm living. So what do they look for? They look for people who can yield a greater profit, people who can pass as many races and ethnicities. So they're looking for people of color, people lacking a strong support system, adolescents with little supervision, runaway or homeless youth are prime targets for this, people from poor neighborhoods, people who are less assertive or mild-tempered, people who are vulnerable to blackmail, people who have a strong interest in protecting others from the trafficker, people with alcohol or substance abuse issues, and people who have been previously raped or molested. And I believe the data that I was researching showed that our Native women are 25 to 100 times percent higher to be affected by this than any other race. So what do they look for? What factors might make them more attractive to the trafficker? Again, they're looking for young, the younger they are, the more money they're gonna make. And it isn't just young women, they're even getting to children. And, you know, I used to think that that was just something that happened in foreign countries and not here. And sadly, that happens here. And it's not just women, they're going after young men and little boys as well. So we really got to be paying attention to this. Some risk factors for sex trafficking victimization: age. Minors are more susceptible, looking for people that are in poverty and unemployment, they're homeless. The LGBTQ population, lack of support or support systems, developmentally challenged or mental health challenges, lack of educational opportunities, history of abuse, child welfare system or foster care involvement, history of violence and abuse. There's, I know, maybe others. If there's others not here, feel free to put those in the chat box. And, you know, look at the risk factors that are present in your tribal community. And I can see some of the young girls that I worked with before being really vulnerable with that. And, you know, looking at my own daughters when they were younger, you know, they could be vulnerable to that if you're not really watching your kids closely. Types of sex trafficking, again, there's family, organized crime, gang trafficking, pimp trafficking, officials trafficking as an abuse of power or authority. Think back to the risk factors you identified in your own community. There are certain types of sex trafficking is there that can exploit the risk factors. So again, it's being really observant of what's going on in your community. Some trafficker tactics. Fraud as an exciting business proposition. Again, you see this in a lot of movies, and some of these girls are struggling and they see this as an opportunity to make money, and they get themselves into some bad situations. There'll be some false promises made to them just to get them to go. They might let them think that they're going to have money and they can decide what they're going to do, when and what. I mean, they'll tell them anything just to lure them in. Of course, drugs and alcohol are usually part of the trafficking. They use the same domestic violence tactics. There's threats and blackmail, so they may start videoing these girls from day one. And if they say they're going to leave or they're going to stop, they'll instantly pull that out on them and be like, well, I'll send this to your mom, your family, I'll put it on, you know, social media. So they've got ways of controlling them before they even start. Again, giving them gifts, special treatment, luxury items. And I watch Dr. Phil a lot, so I've seen some of the women that talk about how they were lured into this, and that was one of the things that lured the younger girls in, was they wanted to get some clothing that was very expensive, designer clothes. Some of their tactics are inflicting sexual, emotional, and mental abuse, telling them, that they can't do anything else, and they know they don't have any place to go, and enabling and inducing substance addiction. They may start providing them with whatever drugs it is they're dealing, and it seems to go hand in hand with drug dealing. Threatening to harm the victim and their family. So these girls will believe that they're saving their family's life if they keep doing what they're doing. They'll withhold money from them, have violent physical assaults. A lot of these girls are physically assaulted. They're raped, tortured, imprisoned, debt bondage. Maybe they've given them so much money, and so that's their way of keeping them in there, saying, they still owe the substantial amount of money and they have to continue working until they pay it up, which never happens. Psychological abuse and brainwashing, coercion, false affection and love. Some of these girls are just looking for a relationship, and some of these guys may be very attractive, and they're playing a game. Once they lure them in, it's over. They will isolate them, and then they also have the fear of arrest and prosecution. So they have all of this to convince these women to stay. There are some positive correlations to domestic violence in this trafficking, such as physical and psychological methods of power and control. The victim may be scared for their life or scared for their family's life. Some of them that get out will be told, they want to get out, but they can't because they fear something's going to happen to their family or their own children. There's beatings or physical, and physical restraint isn't always required because they have that much control over them. They also may create a dependency on the lifestyle because of the money. They don't see any other way to make a substantial amount of money, or any for that matter. And this also dictates and restricts their movement of outside contact. So they are controlled with isolation. Some correlations to domestic violence of threats and physical abuse and forced silence when the victim comes into contact with the justice system. So their responses will be very scripted because they're schooled on what they need to say. Emotional harm can be just as damaging to the victim as physical violence. For example, threatening to out an LGBTQ individual to their community or family may mean the loss of social and economic support. For those encountering victims of trafficking through the justice system, remember that the dynamics of control and coercion affect their ability to use the legal system resources effectively. Sex trafficking and domestic violence can include isolation, economic abuse, gaslighting, so the victim feels responsible for their own violence. As you think about the correlations to domestic violence, think about the traffickers' motives. What are their motives and why are they doing this? It's all about money. It's big money for them. Again, I was doing some research as I was finishing this up, and each girl can make about $500 each encounter she has with the person that she's being sold to, and a lot of them are expected to make up to $1,500 a day. I mean, they're forced to make that amount of money, and if they don't, what is wrong with you? They may be physically abused for that. And this wheel is very interesting because for those of you that have done any domestic violence work, this shows the power and control, how it is positively correlated to the domestic violence power and control wheel. So if you see this, you see all they use: intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, denying, blaming, and minimizing. There's sexual abuse, physical abuse, using privilege, and economic abuse. So if they don't meet their quota for the day, they may be like, well, we're just not going to give you any money until you you have those whatever's required for that day. So then when you look at the violence wheel, the domestic violence programming wheel, and these are available here at this website. This is the Duluth model for domestic abuse. So I thought that was really interesting how they were able to just put that right into that. Some red flags for sex trafficking. You might want to pay attention to girls who are fearful, extremely intimidated while speaking to others, inability or unwillingness to make eye contact with you, look physically malnourished, signs of abuse, torture, or injury. Look at their, their wrists, their ankles. If there's anything you see that might be concerning, and questioning that. Tattoos, burns, and brands can indicate ownership. So some of the people that are their pimps or whatever group is controlling them may burn them or scar them or tattoo them just to mark them. Look for substance abuse, addiction. Are there track marks? Are they lethargic or incoherent? And I've actually seen some documentaries where some of these women are drugged constantly. They're probably never given the opportunity to be being sex trafficked while they're not under the influence. And their clothing might be inappropriate for the climate. It might be freezing cold winter and they have a mini skirt on and, barely covered. Looking at their personal hygiene. Some of them might not even be allowed to clean up. More red flags. Receives a call or text that makes them want to leave immediately. Signs of external monitoring, lack of freedom, scripted responses, financial dependency, communicates they're not in danger when in similarly situated individuals, might feel afraid, incomplete and contradictory victim disclosures. So they may be covering for whoever it is they're forced to work for. Red flags in adolescents. They cut ties with their friends, involved in subordinate relationship with an older friend. School performance attendance is dramatically diminished, or they drop out altogether, get picked up and dropped off by older unrelated person they might say is their boyfriend or a friend, refers to sexual situations that are beyond their developmental age, accompanied by someone who monitors who they talk to and what they say, complains that someone is taking all my money, and they may appear in denial and put on a brave face. Some more common red flags include control by the trafficker, who may be monitoring the victim's every move or the victim's responses to questions. This is especially true for youth victims who can be more vulnerable to traffickers' tactics. The victim may deny victimization or react in a manner that does not fit the profile of a typical victim. When interviewing the victim, it's important to find a private, comfortable space where there will likely be no interruptions. Share the victim's right to confidentiality and organizational confidentiality policies. Remind yourself, we have ethics when we work with people and we're helping them. We need to protect their confidentiality. Inform the victim of limitations such as reporting child abuse and neglect. Again, like I shared with you, I had to report the young ladies that I encountered that this report wasn't even made to anyone. Limit the length of each meeting. Utilize the small talk. Utilizing small talk is appropriate, particularly as an icebreaker. Be honest with them. Exercise patience, as it may take time to gain their trust for them to disclose this information. And these girls, I was just there as a counselor for all the youth that were in the group home when I encountered this, and we had spent a lot of time together. This wasn't something they told me right up front. It was just disclosed as time went on, and it was a sad situation, and I still think about these girls from time to time. Acknowledge the harm that was caused to them and validate the difficulty for them to disclose the information, and differentiate yourself from the trafficker, that you're not there to hurt them, you're there to help them. and avoid personalizing their distrust of you or service providers. Of course, they're going to be afraid to talk to anyone about what really happened to them. Respect their opposition to talk to you. Decide how much information they want to share. Choose whether they will report to law enforcement. Select where the interview will be conducted and stop the interview at any time. And some of these girls will return to the trafficker. It's just like domestic violence. No matter how much abuse they endure, they will still, some of them go back because they don't see no other way out. It's important to do a safety assessment, a safety plan, just like with domestic violence. It identifies ways they can protect themselves from the perpetrator and reduce serious harm. Crucial that the victim advocate, it is crucial that the advocate does not blame them. It is not their fault they got caught up in this situation. Evaluating the risks and safety plans to help them. Safety planning, it's not a guarantee that they will not be injured again. Again, as in domestic violence, when they leave, this is the most dangerous time in their life. Some important questions to ask when you're doing a safety assessment. Ask them how they're, do you feel safe talking to me right now? Is there anything that would help you feel safer? Is anyone watching, listening, calling, or texting you at the moment? Is a person controlling you or one of your group in the building or waiting outside? Are you or someone you love in danger if you talk to me? Are you or someone you love in danger if you accept my help to escape? Is there anything I can do to make this conversation easier or safer for you? And do you have a safe place to sleep and live? So there are some places that are creating what they call safe harbors, where because this is such a big problem now, where they can let them know they have places for them to go where they can be safe and access resources that can help them to get out on their own, get job training and housing. Some screening tools, each intake process is unique. Advocates must consider whether screening tools are appropriate for the situation. Screening tools usually focus on information to address issues such as setting up the interview, developing trust, demonstrating your respect, maintaining client confidentiality, and understanding the effects of trauma and victimization. And I didn't include any screening tools here because, again, if you're working with Native people, you need to decide if they're appropriate. But a lot of the questions that I have on here are really good as long as you're documenting everything that you're going through. Some potential problems with boilerplate screening, they may not be culturally appropriate. A lot of stuff that's out there is not made for Native people. So we have to be mindful of that. Maybe used in agencies that are way different than yours. A lot of these people are happening in larger metropolitan areas, may not have questions about spouse or relatives as the trafficker. So again, my experience was this was their own parents and grandparents that were trafficking their own children in the home. And are the screening tools culturally adaptable? If an advocacy program or law enforcement agency has its own interview screening tool, there are many examples to help shape a unique tool. So knowing your own cultural background and how things go in your own tribal community, it's important for you to think about that when you use any screening tool. One activity that can be done is creating your own culturally appropriate screening tool by identifying questions and screening tool examples. So you might want to use your own current screening form or look at some and modify it and adjust it, including questions that might be more culturally relevant, and add culturally relevant questions that you believe need to be included in the screening tool example. So that just takes your own community working together to come up with its own way of dealing with that. Advocacy for the victims. I use the medicine wheel a lot, and it is to help understand the impact of trauma because it affects our whole mind, body, emotions, and spirit. it does a lot of damage. It just throws everything off for these individuals. And that's also a way of them helping to bring themselves back out of it, dealing with trauma, of being able to help themselves in each of these areas as well. I use the medicine wheel for counseling. I use it for my drug and alcohol treatment. I don't necessarily call it a relapse plan. I might call it, here's your wellness plan, and what are some of the things you can do to take care of your body or help your mind and to address these areas. Victim service, safety, and long-term needs. So it's important to know all of the resources in your area. Every place is different. So they may need a place to live. There's a lot of funding being available now through grants. So if your agency is looking for that, there is a lot of funds that are now being more available to provide these services that they need: transportation, money, food, clothing, other essentials, medical care, substance abuse assistance, support groups, plane tickets, bus tickets, safety planning. I do know here in this town that I live, if you just are in contact with the police, they can help with a bus or transportation. They have funds available to help people get to safety. Some more service needs. They may need help filing a police report, help with protection orders, assistance with child welfare, court support, legal advocacy, and healing ceremonies. The best treatment we can help our people with is our traditional ceremonies that we all have that are specific to our own tribes. Culturally appropriate advocacy. Visit with the victims, take time to get established trust, offer them something to eat or drink. Welcome home ceremonies. Some of these ladies may be returning home from being in a city somewhere, and making sure that they feel welcome to go back home to their communities. Be a good relative to the victim, offer support, accompaniment, transportation as appropriate, work with other responders at victims' request as appropriate, and explore the tribal justice response to crimes of violence. So I know on our reservation, we do have funding available to help them if they don't have any money at all. Culturally appropriate advocacy. Again, we have our medicines for healing and cleansing the mind and body. Education about the crime. A lot of these people don't realize what they're caught up in, and it's, letting them know that there's help out there. Have some options for them. Again, knowing all the resources in your community, using the talking circles, strengthening the spirit, body, and mind will provide overall healing. Again, looking at the medicine wheel concept. To keep the victims safe, these victims are likely to, are the key to successfully investigating and prosecuting human trafficking. So they may help you to identify what's going on in their lives and in the community. The victims often require social services to rebuild their lives. Law enforcement must ensure that victims receive these services, notify them of their rights, and they need to be safe and supported to be effective witnesses. So if they're scared for their life or scared for their family's life, they're not going to want to disclose any information at all, just out of that fear. Advocates as social change agents, it's important to look at what may or may not be working for them. As advocates, look at other agencies and programs that have key roles in responding to victims. What is needed to strengthen an advocacy program relationships with those agencies? Is there a team, an organized collaborative response that is addressing this? If not, what could be done to develop a team? So maybe your domestic violence organizations want to add another component, because there's big correlations in the needs to domestic violence and the victims of sex trafficking. It is important to establish and maintain trust, provide safety measures as much as possible. And they need to be aware of their rights. address their most basic needs to begin with: food, clothing, and housing. Do not duplicate tactics used by traffickers by appearing forceful or pressuring them to make decisions and making them feel indebted to you as a way to manipulate them. Keep them informed of status if there is a criminal justice involvement, and make sure they know that you respect their decision-making process. We're not there to force them to do anything that they don't want to. We want to help them feel that they're in control of where their life is going to go once they decide to get out or they're rescued out of the situation.
Hey, Avis, you wanted me to let you know there's about 10 minutes left.
Okay, I am going to go on ahead and stop here. I have several slides left, but please feel free to use this and finish going through it all. It's full of some really important information that I think would be valuable to anyone who is interested in addressing this type of problem in their community. And like I said, this happens everywhere. I'm just going to flip through these real quick just to give you a brief scan of what you can do,
We
how
do.
you might be able to help.
Do you care if I ask?
Sure.
It says to reduce the demand for sex trafficking is key to combating this societal issue. Can you speak toward what is being done to prosecute the Johns or the people who are running the trafficking?
You know, that varies by community. And as far as I know, on my reservation, other than my personal experience than what has happened, I don't know. I do know off the reservation in large metropolitan areas, they are doing a lot more investigating. They're doing more watching, looking at the, possible indicators. There are special investigation units of a lot of law enforcement agencies now that are taking a more active role. There are people that are trolling the social media and the internet because a lot of these people use technology to lure these girls in. I've seen situations where young girls are on Facebook or whatever it is they're using, and these guys know that they're on there. And so they're watching the websites as well. That's how some of these people are getting caught. It takes a lot of work, and it takes law enforcement really stepping up and realizing that this is a very real issue that happens, not just in large cities. Like I said, this town in Cheyenne, Wyoming, we're considered to be rural frontier area here. And it was one of our massage parlors. And this is not the first time I've seen that happen. So they really need to be looking for those red flags and watching them a lot more closely. As all I know is there are a lot more special investigation units, and all of us that are here today being mindful of these and, getting those red flags out there to people to be watching for dangerous situations or to make changes in their community to be able to address that. I mean, letting our young girls know that this is out there anywhere. And when they're on the internet, they don't always know who they're really talking to. They could be getting lured into some of these situations. I know that. I don't know if that answers your question fully, but it would take a little more research to know exactly what is happening in your area by searching and asking a lot more questions of, how is it affecting your area? Any more questions?
Not yet, but if anybody does have one, please put one in the Q&A or the chat. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. And if you guys know Avis like I do, she really researches this, and that's why she has so much content that's going to be very valuable, even though she didn't get to present it all today for you guys in the handout. So thank you for bearing with us. And just so you guys know, like she said, this was by a special request, and our funder had even wanted us to provide something on human trafficking. So this was really essential in, inserting into her series that she's done. This is series session number 5. And so we'll be wrapping up in July with this special series that we're doing. So she'll be providing one more next, let's see, it's in July, second Wednesday of the month. I do have another question.
Okay.
So Jody said, when I'm traveling and stop at gas stations and rest areas, I use the women's bathroom and see lots of flyers for victims to get help. Since boys are victims too, I assume the flyers are in boys' restrooms too. I wonder how perpetrators who are moving these kids respond to these flyers.
That's interesting. I honestly can't answer that one, but I do see those as well. And I think it's good that we're getting those resources out there to the people that need to see them. And I'm sure the people that are engaging in this activity, and when I see it on the news, it's usually somebody, a higher up official in the community. Some of the most recent shows I like to watch telenovelas in Spanish, and a lot of that, this is what's going on, and it's the law enforcement that's actually involved in this sex trafficking. So these higher up officials, it all comes down to money, and I'm like, this is so sad that we have to even think about this issue, or that we have to even talk about it. But to protect our people, we need to be aware of it. And there may, like I said, these young girls that I encountered didn't even realize that they were being sex trafficked by their own family. And it was very it's a tough thing to deal with. And I see grown women that get caught up in this. You see all these missing people signs, and now my mind goes, oh my gosh, somebody probably has them somewhere and they're sex trafficking them, and they're being drugged up somewhere. And they're just completely, it's a horrible, sad situation. And I have seen where, like I said, the young girls, so if you watch some of those YouTube videos, there's a really good one where these girls are like 14 years old and they're native girls, in the scenario of they got friends telling her, don't do that, but she's already caught up in it. And they're looking for, a lot of young girls that are struggling are looking for money and maybe thinking they're going to meet some guy. And so some of these guys are actually used as bait to lure these girls in. So they have to be careful about that too. And a lot of my friends even do, this online dating stuff. And I'm like, I think that is like probably one of the most dangerous situations that women can put themselves in. And again, it's not just women, they do take males and children. So
yeah, I agree with you completely, Avis. And I when you're presenting this webinar today, my 16-year-old daughter is sitting next to me listening, and she is hearing all these things you're saying, and she's shaking her head. And I said, this is why you need to be careful on the internet, and girls and boys, you never know who you're talking to. And it's just a really good reminder of what can happen. And it scares, of course, a parent to death. But teaching like this is exactly what they need. So awareness, prevention. Shanoa had a question. She heard that the new laws have changed on the reservations regarding tribal sovereignty. And do you know of any updates or changes? She thinks about whether tribal police can hold non-tribal persons in the case if they have something to hold them on.
On my reservation, and this is specific to each tribal's jurisdiction. So again, when I do these presentations, I say I don't speak for everyone, because then somebody could say you're wrong. And I do know on our reservation now that the updates from the Violence Against Women Act that also touches on this sex trafficking is they do now have jurisdiction, but majority of the time the FBI is brought in to handle that situation. And so as far as I know, I haven't seen the sex trafficking, but there has been domestic violence, there has been sexual assaults, and how that's handled on our reservation is federal investigation. It does become a federal crime. It's like they don't just get off where, you know, that our tribal court might not be able to do anything, but that's when the federal law enforcement is brought in. Usually the FBI is brought in those situations. So something does happen.
It sounds like it's different across states. Jamie had said Washington state tribes are able to hold non-members for crimes. So I imagine it varies greatly from one state to another.
It is changing, and you know, it's taking everybody standing up and working together for, you know, the missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, of everybody getting more involved and taking a more active role in changing those laws in our community. So it's good to see that more communities are coming together to make this happen.
I have two questions for you, and then we're gonna have to end.
Okay.
One person said, I know the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement is gaining traction and that the new Congress and White House seem to be advocates for VAWA. How optimistic should we be about the political situation and policy situation around this issue?
How what? Optimistic?
How optimistic should we be about the political situation and policy situation around the issue?
I can't tell you exactly how optimistic, but I'm feeling a lot more hopeful now that we have someone else in office. I feel that it was completely disregarded under our previous president that just left. And I feel a lot more hopeful because a lot of things are changing now in a positive direction. And I feel like the Native voice is being heard so much more. So, you know, don't give up, keep being involved in your communities. And just by your being here today shows me that you're interested and you care about your communities by attending this session today. And like I said, there's more slides I didn't show or cover that talks more about the legal aspects of this situation. So please feel free to finish reading through those and watch some of those videos on YouTube. They're really good. There's some women on there that are actually, you know, sharing their stories of, you know, I didn't even know that that's what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. And these are real people, and it's really interesting to watch.
Tonya had something she wanted to say. Tonya, are you there? Try unmuting one more time. Well, we can't hear you, but let me ask one more question, and if you can mute, go ahead and speak. So one other question was, I just wanted to ask about the connection between economic and ecological issues and the sex violence and sex trafficking. To me, the same settler colony mentality informs the way that predator feels entitled to our lands and our bodies. It seems like the man camps around extraction economies are a big part of it, and I wonder if there are other versions of that dynamic in other communities.
You know, I wonder about that myself. There is a video on the YouTube again, and it talks about this very thing up in North Dakota of those man camps. And when I was doing research on this, there are some articles about all these horrible things. And, you know, they talk about these men who are even married, who are coming to these man camps to come and work. But while they're there, they engage in this sort of thing. You know, somebody's there to make money off the men that are there. And I'm like, that is really sad that this type of thing is going on. And, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if there are other situations like that happening. Yeah, I wouldn't think it's just that. I'm sure there has to be more. On those videos I was watching, there is one in Minnesota of the boats where they're actually using these huge ships, and that's where they're keeping their people that they're sex trafficking. And so this is marketing that industry of the people that work in that type of work. So that is not the oil field business. This is the what do they call it? The shipping economy.
Well, I thank you, Avis, for all this gracious information that you provided us. A lot of people in the chat wanted to thank you. They really want these conversations to be happening more often in this country. So everyone enjoys your webinars and is looking forward to more. And we will do another one in July, like I said, on the second Wednesday. And then Avis is going to be doing a different, we're going to go a different path in the fall, and we'll be talking about postpartum. So look forward to hearing that as well. And for all of you who asked if you will receive these slides, handouts, CEUs, all that will be coming in the follow-up email that we do send out after Avis provides us with the PowerPoint, and we gather all that information to put it together for you guys in one email. So you will be getting this, be patient with us, but it should be arriving in the next day or two.
Next month's presentation will be on historical trauma specific to Native Americans.
Okay, so not in the realm of the self help and therapy, trauma informed care, sorry. Okay, just we'll put it on the website so everybody has the information, and we'll be doing it in meeting format instead of webinars from now on, because there's just a few buttons people push accidentally sometimes. So it's just easier to do it that way. So thank you all. Tonya, I can't let you talk. I don't know. I tried a couple times and we couldn't hear you, but I appreciate everybody staying on a little bit after for these.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, we can hear you now. Did you?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you so much. It was very informative. I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. Everyone else, have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Dr. Garcia, again, and I will be in touch with you.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.